There aren't many tech companies around that have a history stretching back 230 years, but there is one, Ordnance Survey, which makes the definitive master mapping of Great Britain. I sat down with their CEO, Nick Bolton, to discuss the ways in which its relevance is just as powerful now for a thoroughly modern nation. Welcome to you, Nick.
Thanks very much.
People often associate Ordnance Survey with maps, but there is so much more to it, isn't there? Can you talk about your role today?
Yeah, sure. So we are definitely map makers, and ever has it been thus. But those maps are all about connections, and in the way we used to do that through an analog paper model, now of course that's all done through digital as well. And and it is about those connections. It's about the farmer, the connection of the farmer to their land, to the buyer of one house, to the seller of another, to the connections our citizens have with their public service. And even if you and I would decide we're going to go on a walk in the countryside with a pint of beer at the end of it, it would be a map that would provide that connection. So is it relevant today? Absolutely. The digital world has only enabled an even greater use of those connections, and Ordnance Survey is at the heart of that. And because Ordnance Survey's been at this for a very long time, and that we've been honing and refining through the work of hundreds of thousands of people over that 230-year period, it means that we can be very confident about our capability in that data, which means that our customers and our users can really trust that data. In lots of ways, we provide the benchmark, if you like, for that data, which of course then the country relies on.
Few of us think about the web of mission-critical cables and pipes that lie beneath our very feet as we walk around the streets. Ordnance Survey has a really important part to play, doesn't it, with the National Underground Asset Register. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, it's easy to understand the mapping requirement of what's above the ground. We've got to remember there's an awful lot that's below the ground that's just as important, that we rely on every day. The water coming out of the tap, the making sure the electricity comes on so we can watch the TV and so forth. And actually, we look after the assets that lie under the ground as well as the ones that are above it. And to give you an idea of the scale of that, there are 4 million kilometres of pipes and cables underneath the ground. That compares to the 400,000 kilometres of road that we've got above the ground. So that really is a sizable problem. And of course, every year as we progress our society, we dig those things up. But that means that today there are 60,000 accidental strikes every year that cost the economy something like £2.4 billion. So if you've got clarity of what's underneath the ground, you can avoid those things. And fundamentally, you can also save lives, because there are some tragic situations where those accidental strikes happen, that then there are casualties, there is loss of life. So knowing what's below the ground is just as important as above the ground, and Ordnance Survey again plays the central role of connecting those two things.
The National Register is one way Ordnance Survey is collecting and providing crucial data. In what other ways does Ordnance Survey aim to connect the nation?
Yeah, sure. So there are the very visible ways, which come of the ones we've talked about, but there's also a lot of stuff that's actually quite hidden inside Ordnance Survey. We talk about with the invisible fabric of a modern Britain. A lovely example of that is the unique property reference number. So every property in the UK has a unique number. And that really helps with a delivery service knowing that that's the property I deliver to, or an insurer who says, well, that's the property I'm insuring, and so forth. And so actually the wide adoption of those numbers can actually lead to a more effective and more efficient delivery of private services, public services, and actually help us have better lives, easier lives. So when we want to transfer from one broadband provider to another, the computing systems then can actually make that a single button click to actually make that happen. It's very easy to look at maps and think that somehow there's something you put on your wall to represent the past, but actually today they represent very much a foundational platform for a connected Britain.
Why is location data so important?
Everything in our lives really does happen somewhere. The football match we go to see, the friends or relatives and where they live and so forth. And because everything happens somewhere, knowing where that stuff is, what it is and what attributes it has, actually means that we can then live richer, fuller lives, more connected lives, do more of the stuff we like doing, do less of the stuff we don't like doing, by understanding all of that information about location. And again, it does come back to that idea of invisible fabric. Location really matters. So to give you an idea of the scale of that, there are 500 million assets that we hold as an organisation, which are updated 20,000 times a day. That's dramatically different than what was happening in 1791, but it represents the importance of Ordnance Survey in underpinning pretty much every aspect of modern life.
Looking ahead, what next for Ordnance Survey?
Yeah, well, you mentioned at the start that we've been around for 230 years. There aren't many 230-year-old tech companies. We're definitely one of those. And, that transition the organisation has gone on from being analogue and paper to being, digital and connected really means that Ordnance Survey today is as relevant today as it has ever been. And there's still plenty of scope to create a higher degree of connection across all sorts of different industries. And that's absolutely what we're working on. How are we doing that? We're doing that through pushing harder on the technology curve. We've got plenty of opportunities within machine learning about how we can drive that. We're pushing on also the applications, creating more destinations for that data in order that we deliver better citizen services, better outcomes for public services, and better outcomes for private businesses. That's our role.
Nick, I love your passion for what you do. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Nice to meet you.